On today's World Insight, full steam ahead with the 17th China-ASEAN Expo. What's in store at the event on the heels of the RCEP trade deal?
The benefits is region-wide. So even if you have parts from a third country within the region, you can still qualify for free trade benefits.
And a rethink of globalization with unprecedented global challenges amid the pandemic. The future of trade and multilateralism? The answers from 13 ambassadors from 5 continents at a roundtable. Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We start with the 17th China-ASEAN Expo, which kicks off November the 27th. It will run until the 30th, both virtually and in person in Nanning, the capital city of China's Guangxi Autonomous Region. A series of investment and trade promotions will get off the ground. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, also known as RCEP. The Expo aims to help 10 ASEAN members with the capital and technical advantages of other RCEP members: China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand.
I propose to build the 21st century maritime Silk Road with ASEAN countries in 2013 and work together to build a closer China-ASEAN community with a shared future. During the past 7 years, China-ASEAN ties have become the most successful and vibrant model for cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, as well as a vivid example of a community of shared future for mankind.
So what else is in store from the first China-ASEAN Expo on the heels of the RCEP signing? Let's loop in our panelists from the region. For more, joining us in Shanghai, Professor Qian Jun, the Executive Dean of the Fanhai International School of Finance with Fudan University. In Kuala Lumpur, Dr. Azmi Hassan, a Senior Political Analyst. Last but not least, in Tokyo, Lin Tan Wai, an Adjunct Research Fellow with the National University of Singapore. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. On Friday, the China-ASEAN Expo opens. It's a great event for years. Now, this year, it's different because of RCEP or RCEP. Dr. Hassan, how do you see this is likely to be celebrated?
Yes, Henry, RCEP is something that we have been waiting for 8 years for it to be in a few days ago. And after RCEP, there are a lot more cooperation that need to be done between ASEAN and also China. But again, with RCEP finalized a few days ago, it shows to the world that how big countries such as China, for example, and other Australia or New Zealand can work with ASEAN with open and liberal trade system. I think that's a very important message that RCEP brings about to the other world.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Lim, I understand most of the RCEP countries and economies are going to participate in this year's China-ASEAN Expo. So to you, how this will be a jumping start for the next stage of cooperation?
I think this is highly symbolic because RCEP has taken place in an era of anti-globalization forces, and it pushes the idea of free trade onwards. In many ways, China is a very important player. There's also ASEAN centricity inside the project as well. So it's a win-win situation for many countries. And RCEP also seems to be able to allow Southeast Asia to tap into China's market. And in return, China is able to connect with ASEAN. Because as you know, in December 2015, ASEAN countries quietly have formed the ASEAN Economic Community. So there are many countries that can play the role of a pathfinder between the two countries in order to attract and invite Chinese companies to invest in ASEAN, and also to get ASEAN companies to participate in China. At the same time, RCEP has also accelerated the ability as well as the potential for CJK, Northeast Asian Free Trade Agreement, to possibly kick off. So in many ways, for many different countries in this large region, it appears to be a win-win situation.
There are a lot of platforms and regional possibilities that are happening all at the same time. We'll see which goes first. Having said that, though, Professor Qian, to you, China-ASEAN trade, if you look at it, over the past 1 year almost, since we are reaching December very soon, already 15% of China's total trade. Very impressive, particularly for this year, a difficult year. Your take?
So I would add to the point that during this very special year, the China-ASEAN trade is the largest for both sides. So for China, the other usual major trading partners like Europe and the U.S., there was more retreat. But with ASEAN in this very special year, export and import on both sides account for the largest trading partner for China and for ASEAN. So, and then if you look at RCEP, in addition to China and the ASEAN countries, we also have Japan, the world's third largest economy, South Korea and New Zealand and Australia. So really, it's a fantastic trading bloc of what we call this Asian Pacific economies. Again, this not only shows that globalization or regional free trade agreements still possible. As I said before, when you look forward, it is this region, it is the economies in the RCEP region that's actually propelling global recovery and global growth. So for these nations, for these economies to get together to promote even more trading and other economic activities, really, it's really encouraging news for the world.
It is encouraging. Just think about the synergy that can be demonstrated during the expo, by these vibrant economies. Particularly this year, this part of the world seems to be doing so far prevention and control relatively more successfully than some other regions, and therefore gives it the room to develop also about the interaction among one another. Isn't it, Dr. Hassan?
Trade between China and ASEAN starting second quarter or third quarter of this year has been on the uptick, even though the pandemic in most of the ASEAN countries are still running wild. So this is a very good news indeed. This shows that China and ASEAN trust each other and communicate each other. In fact, as I see it, China is the first country outside ASEAN that has been communicating with ASEAN regarding pandemic. And with that, I think a few initiatives has been formed and agreed upon how this China and ASEAN can work together. But really, I agree with you that there are a lot more things that can be done. And ASEAN cannot work this alone. ASEAN needs other countries. And this, in this case, especially China.
When you think about it, Dr. Hassan, what are the things that you think ASEAN countries will be offering, to the Chinese market and also to some of the developed economies such as Japan and South Korea, since RCEP has already become a reality? Of course, there's still a political process in every economy to approve it, but still, this is really a starting point. So what are some of the images you can, describe to us as to what goods, how they can really benefit one another?
Well, before that, ASEAN needs China's technology. For example, during this pandemic time, digital economy is what we need. Okay, talk about that. I think China is willing to help ASEAN in this matter. And ASEAN also can help China in terms of, for example, manufacturing products, electronics, and also, I would say, electric products to make it the supply chain between ASEAN and China as uninterrupted. And don't forget agricultural products. ASEAN has a lot of resources on that. And with RCEP, I think these particular raw materials that ASEAN can provide, and also China can provide the high technology and expertise, I think we can work each together to make things better for the world, Tianwei.
Sounds fascinating. Talking about the supply chains and also the manufacturing chains, Professor Chen, we see earlier, the global supply chain has been established. China is a big component of it. So are economies in the ASEAN countries. And it used to work like this. The multinational companies have different places around the world for their raw material supplies, component supplies. China is a big chunk, but also ASEAN increasingly play a bigger role. But now, we see some changes in global supply chains, and therefore there's a realignment almost of roles these economies could play. And therefore, what does that mean? Opportunities and challenges for China and ASEAN to streamline their roles in the global supply chain and their roles toward one another in this regard. Professor Chen.
So as you said, if you look at global supply chain, certainly a lot of multinational corporations, they have production and sales all around the world. But I would like to emphasize that between China and the ASEAN economies, and perhaps you can add Japan and South Korea, in this Asia-Pacific region, you actually have what we call closed circles of many manufacturing industries. That is, China can take some of the input from ASEAN economies, produce in China, sell them back in China domestically, but also sell them to Asian economies, and so is Japan and South Korea. That is, this is why it's so important. With Europe and North America pretty much still shut down, not fully recovered, the reason why China and ASEAN resume a lot of trade, and this trade becomes the most important for both sides. If you think about electronics, China produced electronics. We can sell them to many countries, including ASEAN economies. As other speaker said, China imports agricultural products from ASEAN economies for domestic consumption. So these are examples that within the economy, and then I should also add that Japan and South Korean companies also use inputs they gather from, among other places, from China, from ASEAN countries. They also produce high-tech, high-end products as well. And then these products and services will then consumed by consumers in these economies.
Right.
There are actually many industries, you can give that example, that the supply and demand and consumption can be done in this big circle. Again, not to say that we don't need other parts of the world to participate, but in a very special year like this, it's very important that because you have a closed circle among these economies, this is what makes it possible that economies in the RCEP region can grow, can recover very quickly. And that's going to actually continue, because if anything we learn the lesson, it's actually very hard to replace or to break the parts within this circle. Certainly, with the signing of RCEP, we only expect these supply chains to strengthen.
Yes.
But obviously, I'm sure everyone in the agreement would welcome additional members to join the trading bloc.
Mr. Lim, listening to the other two gentlemen, one could probably sum it up and probably say, in this region, the RCEP member economies, we've got everything, right? So we could actually help one another, support one another at the most difficult time when others are struggling to find the absent spaces in their global supply chain. Mr. Lim, we've got everything, it seems.
Yes, actually, China, Japan, and Korea have been setting up production networks in ASEAN for a very long time.
That's right.
Particularly Japan, but also China is also expanding its production network in ASEAN. So this will help integrate the economies of the region closer. Now, the important thing about RCEP is that it is much more useful for production networking than bilateral free trade agreements. Because when you sign bilateral free trade agreement, it could mean that if between two countries, if their products have parts from a third country, they may not be able to enjoy the free trade benefits. But with RCEP, RCEP, the benefits is region-wide. So even if you have parts from a third country within the region, you can still qualify for free trade benefits. So this is a very, very landmark feature of RCEP. Now, the other thing is ASEAN has ambitions. ASEAN wants to set up the smart city network. 15 to 20 smart cities have been selected by ASEAN to become the forerunners in Industrial Revolution 4.0. This is where ASEAN can work with China, which is leading in terms of e-commerce, e-banking, and many other technologies. It is also interested to work with other RCEP member states like Japan and South Korea, which have advanced technology. This is a win-win situation for all these countries because there is still a wide market and expanding need for Industry 4.0 application. And in this sense, the Northeast Asian countries, CJK, China, Japan, and Korea, have very good technologies that ASEAN can enjoy and need as well as consume while integrating it into the smart city network.
Right.
That is the ambition that ASEAN has and can cooperate with CJK and other RCEP countries on it.
Dr. Hassan, I can see that all of you in this panel are very proud of our region and certainly of the achievements of RCEP. Having said that, though, about the digital economy, this region is really on the rise, not just China, Japan, and South Korea, but also ASEAN economies. China, for example, has been working with ASEAN countries on the digital hub. For example, over the past few years, the digital Belt and Road, as they say, and also the digital economy represented by e-commerce in Southeast Asian countries. So, Dr. Hassan, tell me more about how do you see the current stage of this development?
It is true that we are very proud, and I'm, as an ASEAN citizen, also are very proud of the RCEP because ASEAN is a small organization compared to China, for example, as an economic power. Before this, that BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which ASEAN involved a lot, has been labeled as a neo-colonialism by China. But of course, this is not true. And RCEP proved that big countries such as China can work together with smaller organizations and smaller nations in ASEAN. So no doubt that a lot of more work needs to be done. But of course, we are proud of what has been achieved, especially under RCEP.
Professor Chen, of course, China does not see ASEAN as a small organization at all. It's actually extremely instrumental organization in the region and probably beyond. Just look at what has been achieved. It's really amazing. Having said that, though, what about e-commerce? That's likely to be a great growth point.
China is actually leading in some areas of e-commerce. So companies like Alibaba, like Tencent, they can expand to other economies. In my view, as long as they can bring good technology, useful technologies for consumers, for not only big companies but for small companies to do business, that's good. That's what we call inclusive finance.
Right.
And again, we've already seen examples. I know that this current China-ASEAN Expo will have two parts, right, including a virtual part. In the China Import Expo in Shanghai, we've already seen that a lot of foreign non-Chinese companies use the technology of VR. They can introduce their products and also the services, into these exhibition rooms, so that the Chinese consumers can get a very good feeling about how much they can enjoy these products.
Yeah.
So these are examples that technology and e-commerce can boom, can bridge the gap where physical contact is limited and can help accelerate, if you will, accelerate the resumption of all the trading activities. And yeah, I'm very glad to hear that some of these Chinese technologies have been used in many areas in other parts of the world, including ASEAN economies.
Absolutely. If you look at, Mr. Lim, the number the ASEAN economies aspire to achieve, 2015, the e-commerce related income of the GDP is only 1.3%, but by the year 2025, 10 years, 8.5%. So that's a huge increase if you look at the GDP percentage that's coming from e-commerce and other digital economies. So certainly ASEAN has a big map to write on.
As you have mentioned, it is experiencing exponential growth. And China certainly has champions in this sector, Alibaba, for example. And Alibaba has actually bought over Lazada,
yes,
right, which is the largest e-commerce engine in Southeast Asia. And so Chinese companies, e-commerce companies are poised to enter the Chinese market. And also there's much to learn from the Chinese technology. For example, Alibaba and Tencent are not just e-commerce engines per se. They also offer electronic micro loans for consumers to purchase items. So these are things that the two regions can share with each other, particularly in this kind of virtual technology. As I mentioned before, ASEAN has its own ambition. It wants to have a network of smart cities, and these forerunners in the smart cities can then become the model for other cities in ASEAN to follow.
Right.
And so the advantages for Chinese companies, if they have an early start in the ASEAN market, it means that they can capture the market well.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to a successful China-ASEAN Expo and certainly RCEP being translated into real actions and real results. Thank you, Qian Jun, Azmi Hassan, and Lin Tan-Wai. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Coming up on World Insight, a rethink of globalization with unprecedented global challenges amid the pandemic. The future of trade and multilateralism, the answers from 13 ambassadors from 5 continents at a roundtable after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020 has presented unprecedented challenges for China and the rest of the world. The re-emergence of protectionism and nationalism has unraveled the process taken in the past and forced a rethink of globalization. At the Ambassadors Roundtable, a co-production between CGTN and Center for China and Globalization, I asked 13 ambassadors to China from 5 continents about the prospects of global trade, the impact of great power relations, and on top of that, the geopolitical upheavals in 2020. Let's listen in. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you at the Ambassadors Roundtable. We are going to discuss this pivotal moment for future of globalization with a focus on trade and multilateralism. My name is Tian Wei. I'm a moderator and host coming from CGTN, China Global Television Network. And it's an honor to be here as the moderator for this session, which is a joint session between CCG and CGTN. And I'm so honored to introduce this absolutely strong panel. Ambassador Ferrari, coming from Italy. Ambassador Chapias from the EU. Ambassador Billy, coming from France. Ambassador Sugo from China. Ambassador Barton from Canada. Ambassador Siri Jala from Finland, Ambassador Osman from African Union, Ambassador Boukelfa coming from Algeria, Ambassador Fletcher from Australia, Ambassador Geertz from the Netherlands, and also we have Ambassador Zajakowski from Poland, Ambassador Monsalvi from Colombia. We also have Ambassador Descala from Spain. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So I would take the liberty to go to the second round of our discussion with also the preset rules. That is, we have a quicker interaction because we earlier already mentioned on some of the specific challenges that we have globally. Why don't we roll up our sleeves and get to work? As you all beautifully illustrated, it's much better to seek solutions than to complain. And you have done exactly what you have preached. So let's do the challenges and let's see the solutions if it's possible. One of the things you all mentioned about is the pandemic. How can we create, with efficiency, cooperation in that regard? That could, in a way, pave the way for the other issues we're also facing internationally. And every one of you seem to point out to climate change issues, and also the fact that the so-called geopolitics is bothering us so much. We can't get to work as a result of that. And the unpredictability of some national politics is also in the way. How can we overcome them together? I know it's too much to ask because ambassadors are representing their countries. But even with that limit, or shall I say with huge power that you have in your hand in being a bridge, let's work on those issues. So I would call on another round, if possible, to let every one of you to speak more focused on these points. Is it okay? I ask for your permission. Okay, thank you. Now, who would like to go first? Ambassador Chapias, yes, be my right-hand gentleman and very proactive in answering questions. You have, unfortunately, 1 minute, 1 minute and a half the most, everyone.
There is a commitment, public commitment by China's authorities to make the vaccine a public good. Meaning, in our opinion, a global public good, not a China public good only. Well, we'd like to know more about it, how it would go. We welcome China into COVAX facility, which is a distribution facility of vaccines. But for the time being, there's not enough transparency on what is going to happen in the next few weeks. And so we'd like to see more about that. If China wants to cooperate, it needs to do more.
There are two other gentlemen raising their hands, Ambassador Billy and Ambassador Su. And then anyone want to speak, please raise your hand so I can see you in the process.
Well, quickly, I would like to underline that our President already congratulated Joe Biden as well, because I think it's a fair point to make sure what are the results. And we had the issue of solution and complaints, and I wanted to put forward the idea that we'll have also to have the right diagnostic about the problem of today. And the diagnostic is also that there is things that should have to change. The statu quo is not possible. There were things that were possible when China was a developing country. China is not a developing country anymore, and so we need a real playing field. And if we don't have the right diagnostic, it's very difficult to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Ambassador Su?
Well, thank you very much. Now, the question is, what is globalization? Actually, globalization is a process of reallocation of resources for achieving the maximum of efficiency, as Madam Tian just mentioned. And we are fellow global villagers. We have one planet to share, one future to share as well. So if the global villagers want peace, stability, development, health, and prosperity, cooperation is the only way to go. Well, with regards to the future, it seems to me that there is no reason for euphoria. However, but one can predict with a good common sense and reason that there could be a window of opportunity for Sino-US relations to return to normal, or at least to come to a halt to the downward spiral or escalation of tension. There could be an opportunity for dialogue and consultation, since we all know that the future president is unlikely to use tweets in his running of daily domestic or international affairs. So there is a prospect for setting up mechanisms or platforms for bilateral contact. This bilateral contact could be multi-level. As we all know that Biden and President Xi Jinping, when they were vice presidents, they had very good contact with each other. And also between these two countries, there are various contact formats between and among think tanks and between social organizations and so on. However, regarding U.S.-China relations, now we can see that the relationship is now in the most complex and grave situation since the establishment of diplomatic relations. So in the future, what we need is to maintain, at the 3 points, maintain cooperation in areas where it is possible. For instance, it could be climate change, public health, cybersecurity, in cooperation and coordination in Korean Peninsula, Afghanistan, and other international regional issues. Of course, coordination and cooperation could be extended to WHO and CPTPP, and etc. And there should be mutual respect of each other's core interests during the process. And the third point is that we need to set up mechanisms for effectively managing differences and avoiding confrontation. Final word is that President Xi Jinping has already said cooperation is the only correct choice for China and US. And for US and China, of course, we cannot expect the two countries to solve all the world's problems. However, it is indispensable for solving all major problems. So now what we would like to propose is still coordination, cooperation, and stability.
Thank you. And I see Ambassador from Algeria earlier also raising your hand, please. And Ambassador of Spain later.
Let me to be a little bit pessimistic. I don't believe that we will have a better world in the future, because the president-elected new American administration, rolling from next January, will implement surely a moderate strategy and will adopt new vision that will be more helpful for the US economy recovery. And they will be more involved in multilateralism. But in the same time, they will maintain a hard and demanding stance toward China. Let me to reminds an article published by Mr. Biden, Foreign Affairs, in March 2020. He said, China represents a special challenge. I have spent many hours with its leaders, and I understand what we are up against. Mr. Biden met Mr. Xi Jinping in 2011 and 2012 8 times. China is playing the long game by extending its global reach, promoting its own political model, and investing in the technology of the future. The United States doesn't need to get tough with China. The most effective way to meet that challenge is to build a united front of US allies and partners to confront China. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Ambassador of Spain, please. We would love to give some time to our observers for example, from India, from United Arab Emirates, and from other countries. You can also raise your hand if you want to speak at this moment, but everybody will have to be brief. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
All those problems we have mentioned are extremely complex. The only way to solve these problems, to try to solve these problems, is by to build political confidence. Politics are crucial. There is now a new opportunity between China and the United States after Biden's election. There is also a very good political dialogue between China and the European Union. But in order to build political confidence, we have to see that the issues which concern us, which worry us, are addressed. The agreement on investment is a good example of that, and the issue raised by Ambassador Chapuis of mobility would also be a very important one.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And I understand from my colleagues that Ambassador of India would also like to speak a few words. Ambassador, Mr. please. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Very few words indeed. I think a number of my colleagues have referred to the need for the reform of the WTO. It's actually not just the WTO, but the entire institutional architecture of world governance that needs reform, because these institutions do not reflect the reality today. They reflect the reality at the end of the Second World War. So as we go forward into a new era, we do need to look at reform very, very seriously. One other point which I think got missed out, I think, in all the priorities that were mentioned by a number of my colleagues here, that needs to be addressed is inequality. As WTO reform gets underway, we need to not only think about free trade and opening up markets and market access, but also addressing the issue of inequality. We should remember that development was a very, very important plank in WTO discussions when they were going on. They must return to the center of our focus. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a very important note that you mentioned. Certainly, SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, among them, there are a lot of issues regarding what you have touched on, and of course, some we haven't got a chance to touch on. We hope in future conversations. And I have Ambassador Ferrari also want to speak a few words.
Oh, just to stand my ground, but I do agree very much with Dominique, what Dominique and Vikram have said earlier. I still think what we need in the very short term is to jumpstart the globalization, to remove barriers, to increase the international standards. As Dominique well put it, we need an oiled, multilateral, rules-based trade system. This goes for Italy very, very much. We are a trade country. We need to get back to protecting free trade. This implies FTAs, a global level playing field, and a strong reinforcement of WTOs and other similar organizations which manage world trade. Thank you.
Do we have any other gentleman or lady want to speak up for this conversation? If not, let me wrap up by having one last request. For every one of you, both the panelists who are having lengthy answers, and of course our wonderful observers as well, to speak one word. Well, we are getting even shorter, the answer. One word will be that word that would solve many of the problems, ladies and gentlemen, you mentioned today. That one word. If I come with every one of you, just one word. Yeah. Mr. Ambassador Gertz, you want to speak about the earlier answer or about this one? Okay, let me go with from the very beginning, Ambassador India, and then we go this way. Is it possible? Thank you, sir, for your graciousness. Please, Ambassador of India. One word, please. Set a good example for everyone.
Understanding.
Thank you.
Political confidence.
But it's a phrase. It will pass. Okay, thank you.
Trust.
Think.
Equality.
Cooperation.
That was mine. Cooperation. Right now, I'd say vaccine.
Democracy.
Cooperation. It's getting difficult. Sustainability.
Confidence.
Dialogue.
Okay, no more cooperation. Trust.
Solidarity.
I'm totally in line with you. Solidarity, definitely.
If I may have 3 words there, it's for the next year, it is the year of peace and trust.
I heard a lot about cooperation, dialogue, trust, and also hard work, I guess. So that is pretty much the underlying meaning of everything you just said. I want to thank you on behalf of our co-organizers, CCG and CGTN, for your candidness and also for your friendship. Thank you so much. Let's give them a warm round of applause. We really appreciate it. My name is Chen Wei. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching, and bye for now.